Hey guys, today I'm in Dream Car Builder, and as the name suggests, I'm going to be building a cargo plane. I've gotten a few comments asking I make a more normal plane, so I decided to give that a shot this week. So let's get right into it. So the first thing I do is load up Sandbox, and I had here my ornithopter I made in the last episode, so I had to fly that around for a few minutes. And it was pretty fun, but then I realized I should probably not be distracted and actually work on this week's episode. So the first thing I did was start working on the framing for the cargo plane. Now, there's a few things to keep in mind here, and one of them was the sizing of the plane and exactly how big I wanted it to be. Now, I really didn't know what I wanted. I knew I had to be wide enough to hold the seat of the car and also have room for the wheels at the bottom, but the length was a little bit more confusing. I ended up settling on this size, which was enough to hold a car in the back, have the wings in the middle, and then be able to balance it with the seat in the front. So I'm just making a rectangular prism now. I have to support it with a bunch of X cross braces, and I'm giving it a bit of a trapezoidal profile on the back, and this should give a bit more room for the wheels at the bottom, and then it can taper off the top. I don't need it to be so big. And now I'm adding in the wings, or the bases for the wings. Originally I was going to go for some triangular wings, but it looked kind of boring, so I decided to shorten them up a bit and make them have more segments so I can give a bit more of a rounded shape to them. And I got this shape, which looks pretty good, but I realized I made it a bit small, so I just stretched it out a bit, and now it looked much closer. So now is always the fun part where I have to strengthen all of these pieces, or all the nodes. I have to give them some support pieces, and I do the same in the back. And then for the wings, I have to connect all of the nodes on the framing pieces together. And this won't make the wings stable in 3 dimensions, but it should keep them having the correct basic shape. Alright, and now I'm working on the landing gear. So to do that, I'm adding in a few wheels in the front, and then I just have to add in a rod. And this is pretty simple. It's probably the simplest landing gear mechanism you could make, in that I just have to tell the rod to expand and contract, and it'll pull in and push out the landing gear. So I have to set the binds correctly for that. And I'm trying that here, but I didn't tell it to expand and contract enough, so it just looks like it's staying in place. So after telling it to expand and contract much further, now it bounces up and down quite violently. And this is actually not that bad. It looks a little bit juddery, but it's the correct movement. But the next important thing to focus on is those wings, since they're not stable in 3 dimensions, which is a problem when I want them to support the plane. And to fix those wings, I just need to copy the original wing profile I just made, and then push it down so I have support in a 3rd dimension. And of course, once I do that, I just need to connect them together with a lot of framing pieces to create triangles, since triangles are a very sturdy shape. So I'm just doing that here, and now if I go to test it, they don't fall apart in the way they did before, but they still can rotate. And this is because the wings are very heavy, and they put a lot of torque on the center body, so they end up just deforming it. But if I connect the wings together, it makes them a bit more stable, and now they still flop around a little bit, but they don't flop down as much as they did before. I can address that in a bit actually, but what I want to focus on first is adding some panels onto the wings, and the panels are what actually give the wings air resistance and the ability to lift the plane. So I have to do that here. It also looks pretty since panels fill in all the gaps and cover all the ugly framing pieces. And I'm adding in jets. And the jets are the actual propulsion of the plane. They're going to be what's pushing it forwards. So I add that in, and for my first test here, I throw it off the building, and it's not that successful. Actually, it's very unsuccessful, and it's because I don't have any way to control the plane. We'll get back to that in a bit, but first I want to focus on the cargo bay. Or, well, the end of the cargo bay. This is the area that I actually want to rotate up and down to open and close the bay. So I end up making a profile for that here, and then connect it together with a bunch of X pieces. So it rotates on that top piece, so that I can have it open and close. I'm going to use a rod for that. But here I just wanted to test it to see how it looks. And it seems pretty good. So the second thing I need is the horizontal stabilizers on top. So to add those in, it's pretty simple. I just need to connect them together with, yeah, you guessed it, a bunch of framing pieces, and then using some panels for air resistance. Now it works, but it still flops down, and now I can address that with these rods. So if I tell the rods to go into the extreme position, what that means is when I press the key to activate them, they open all the way, and then when I press the key again, they close all the way. So it's like a toggle. And now you can see how it opens and closes the back of the plane. And finally, I'm going to be stabilizing the wings like I said before, by connecting one framing piece from the front of the plane to the edge of the wing, and then another from the back of the plane to the edge of the wing. And this should give it a bit more stability. Alright, now it's time to add in some controls for the plane. And I can do that with this triangle piece I just added in, a rod that I just added in there, and then putting a panel on that triangle piece. So as those rods expand and contract, they should go opposite of each other, which allows the plane to rotate clockwise and counterclockwise, so I have roll control over it. There I had the rods expanding way too much and they ended up just breaking it. But if I tell them to calm down, now as I pull them in and push them out, they go opposite of each other, and this should allow me to rotate clockwise and counterclockwise. And now I threw the plane off the building, and I get a little bit of counterclockwise rotation, which is good, but I ended up making it very unstable, and the plane's also very tail heavy, so it just broke almost instantly. But I wanted to give a bit more room to add in the pitch control, So I had to push that just to the edge of the plane, and I'm going to do that with this rectangle shape. So it's achieving the exact same thing. It's going to roll the plane, but I could do it in a more confined space. So it's sort of swinging around quite a bit here, and it's because I forgot to actually add in the structural pieces to support it. Basically, I just need to connect all the vertices of that rectangle together into a center point and then push that center point down so I have stability in a third dimension. But it works the same way as before. When one of the panels goes down, the other goes up, and this allows me to roll the plane. Another optimization I made is pushing down that extra profile of the wing I have, which gives it a bit more stability in the third dimension, which prevents it from flopping around as much as it was. And now I'm adding in the pitch control, which is very similar to the roll control actually. Same sort of deal where I have this rectangular panel, and then I have that center supporting pyramid piece. But the difference with this one is I want the rods to expand and contract in unison. Here I don't have it set up right, it's actually overexpanding and they're going against each other. But after fixing that, now as one of these panels pitches up, the other one also follows it. And this should allow me to pitch up and down the plane as I fly. And these are actually all the controls I need to fly the plane, so I decided to give it a bit of a test. It's still very tail heavy, so it's difficult to fly, but it seems to sort of get the job done. I can roll it, I can move it wherever I want, except I got a bit too greedy there, and well, yeah, I don't need to explain what happened. So next thing I wanted to do is add in some rear landing gear, since I forgot to add that in when I added in the front landing gear. Works the same way though, where I just have a rod that pulls in and pushes out the wheels, and this just deploys and retracts the landing gear. Alright, and at this time, things were looking pretty good, so I wanted to go ahead and work on some of the aesthetics of the plane. So I'm covering all of the framing sections on the outside with some panels, and I'm making all of the panels white, so it has a kind of cleaner look to it. So that's what I'm adding in here. And now everything in the back was done, so I wanted to focus on the front of the plane, but this needed a bit more work than just adding panels, because the actual framing pieces of the plane were pretty simple. They really were just there just to support the front, but now I want them to also look good. So I'm adding in a few more pieces and giving it a little bit more of a square profile, if that makes sense. So after I finished that here, I decided to add in a few panels, but I wanted to also check and make sure that everything I changed structurally with it was also going to work. So I loaded it in, but that's kind of a problem. So I was a little worried I was about to lose everything I just did. So went back into Sandbox, but fortunately everything was still there. So that was really lucky. So after saving, I decided to just finish everything up, throw on the extra panels, and after putting in all the panels and making them white, I wanted to make the windshield blue. Now, I came back later and actually made the windshield out of glass. I did not realize there's a thing you could do in this game, I just thought you could change the color. So now I'm just making them blue to give the illusion that there's an actual windshield there, but I'll come back and show you that it's actually made out of glass later. But that's sort of the final look of the plane, and it crashed again when I tried to launch it. So this time I wanted to change the map and see if that would fix the problem, and that seemed to be it, so fortunately that was a pretty easy thing to avoid. But now I have all the aesthetic things done, and also I increased the structural stability of the plane a little bit by adding a few more framing pieces, and also I moved the jets from the end of the wings to the center of the plane. And this just puts less torque on the center of the plane, and it puts less weight on the wings themselves, so this ended up helping quite a bit. One of the last things I needed to do to make this cargo ready was fix the landing gear. Because when I load it in here, you see how it just bounces up and down quite a bit. This is because the landing gear has no suspension at all. It's just a rod connected directly to the wheels, and the wheels are connected with framing pieces directly to the plane. So I thought this might be a big problem when I tried to land it, and that's what I'm going to try to do here. And you can see as soon as I touch down, the back landing gear instantly just deforms, and the front landing gear just causes the plane to bounce up and down quite a bit. So I partially disassembled the plane here, just to look at the landing gear a bit better again. And now this time I realized I need some sort of spring mechanism to sort of act as a dampener, so that when it hit the ground it would actually be able to like not bounce around like crazy. And I have that sort of mechanism in here, and this time I'm trying to have the rod expand and push back the spring and pull in the landing gear. And there it started to do it, but it didn't quite go far enough, so I made the spring a bit longer and also told the rod to expand further. And this time it was a bit better, but it wasn't quite there, and I eventually got it just by making the spring really short. So now as the rod expands, the landing gear gets contracted into the plane, but once it's expanded, it still has that suspension, which is exactly what I needed. So I just transferred that over to the back as well. So now I have suspension in the landing gear on both the front and the back, and I'm going to try a landing here. It was really bad, but at least this time, when I try to actually hit the ground, the springs sort of help push the landing gear in, and it helps it stay on the ground and not just bounce like crazy. Now with the suspension on the wheels looking pretty good, I wanted to add some cargo onto this plane, and as I alluded to earlier in the video, I'm going to have some car drive into it. Now I have two wheels up here in the editor, and you can see how they appear, but they don't load in at all once I load into the map. And the reason for this is they aren't attached to the car in any way with any framing pieces. If something isn't attached to the seat of the car, it won't get loaded in. So that means I need some sort of way to use like a tether to attach the car onto this. And the idea was I could drive it into it, but I would still be attached with this tether, which wasn't awesome. I'd like it if it would be completely free, but unfortunately it doesn't quite work in single player. I'll get back to how I fix this in multiplayer, but for now, I'm going to try using some tether to attach the car to the plane. So I just built up a simple car here, and the hope was I would just crash into the plane, but I ended up just going into the plane because I forgot that there's no collision, which made that idea just not going to work. So I could fix it a little bit, and the hope is I could use these rods, and I could contract the car and pull it into the plane. And by doing that, I would sort of lock it during flight, but then I could expand the rods, which increase the length of the tether, and then have it drive wherever it wanted when it's not in flight. I also made the windshield here out of glass. You can see the guy sitting in there. But now I'm going to put the car in the plane to start off with, and I'm going to attach it using those rods. So I can expand the tether, and the car gets not really that far. He doesn't even really get out of the plane, to be honest, so this already wasn't looking too good. But I figured if I could get off the ground and if it could fly, I could probably improve upon it and get it somewhere where it was looking pretty good. So here I'm going for a takeoff, but I realized there's a pretty serious problem where I can just sort of get caught going in circles around the plane. And it's because I don't have any lock in another dimension to stop it from rotating like that. And to be honest, I don't really have an easy solution to that using the rods, so I went for my third solution, which was using breakable pieces to hold onto the car and hopefully just break it off and let it drive away once I get done carrying it somewhere. So here the car just sort of breaks off. But it was a pretty bad flight, it wasn't getting held in too well, so I got rid of my weird rod chain. And instead I'm going to be using some rods, and they're going to pull really hard on these really weak pieces of framing. And by doing that, I'm intentionally going to break those pieces of framing, and then the car can drive away. Now the downside to this is I can't load the car in afterwards. I can only break it out once. So this is the best solution I had in single player, and here you see I broke those rods, and now the car's driving away. So yeah, again, this is the best I had in single player, but it just wasn't awesome. And here I'm going in for a landing. And you can see that the car is loaded in there, and now as I land, I can let the car out, and it can drive around. But that's about the best I could do with this. So I moved on to my final idea, which was in multiplayer. You can have your car collide with other people's. So I had my friend loaded in the game and drive into my plane. And now if we take off for the other airport, you see he gets held in there. The lag's a little bit weird, and there's a lot of desync, but it was working well enough that I could at least get to the other airport. And now as I circle around, he gets held in there and I can land, and everything's good. And the only thing that kind of breaks the illusion is he can't drive out the back because of the way the collision works with other cars. I had to make him drive out the front. So it breaks the illusion a little bit, but it's at least kind of working. And he can drive around. Then he can load himself back in, and we can go back to the other airport. So guys, thanks for watching. I'm glad I figured out how to get this to work in multiplayer, even if it isn't the perfect solution. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask below, and otherwise, until next time.